good with the shot of the goal!
Big goal for Ferris State. Make it a 3-1 game.
Great job by the Bulldogs to find a way to get it done.
Some people don't like it, but that's just how I am.
College sports is shifting. It's all about game experience.
I can't think of better people to be spending my time with.
We raise a family here, and it's something that's not seen in a lot of other schools.
You're listening to Behind the Bulldogs, brought to you by Ferris State Athletics.
We're back with another episode of Behind the Bulldogs here with WBRN and as well on Spotify and all of our great podcast platforms. It's yours truly, Brandon Worth, joined by Joe Nagy.
Hello.
And Brody Kaiser.
What's up?
We are so glad you guys are back. We are in for our fourth installment here of our summer sports recap series. It's certainly been a great ride so far. The fans have loved it. And we're excited to bring back another sport. So we're going to take the next 2 weeks and break down track and field because there's a lot to break down. There's a lot of people competing, and we don't have the time allotted to fit it in one. So we're going to split it into women's and men's. We'll start with women's today, and then we'll get into men's next week. And so you can expect a lot of running, a lot of jumping, a lot of throwing, and a lot of fun stuff over the next 2 weeks in track and field.
Yeah, a lot of athletes.
Yes, for sure. We do have to note a disclaimer here that one of us is on his medical, you could call it a flu game here. Brody is back with us.
That's true.
After a surgery, you are an absolute man for the people. Dedication is level 10.
True man of the people over here. No, I had the old wisdom teeth out this past week, so the mouth is still a little sore, but we're getting there. We're doing it.
Yes, for sure. So bear with us. We're going to have a great show for you here, and it is presented by our great friends at Bezos Digital. They're part of the Big Rapids Media Network that includes the Big Rapids area most listened to radio stations as well as the most popular online newspaper. You can find out more at DezosDigital.com. If you need help with digital and social media presence with your website, all of your digital marketing campaigns, they can help you out, and they can certainly do all the work for you at DezosDigital.com, and you can find out more within the Big Rapids Media Network. So, fellas, let's jump right in, shall we?
Yeah, let's do it. Especially with Brandon being on the track team, he's kind of our in-house expert, so he might be talking a little bit more than he usually does these next two episodes.
Maybe a little bit more, but
Brandon made it through the entire intro without even mentioning the fact that he is on the team that we're talking about over the next 2 weeks.
Did I mention? Oh, shoot, I probably should have. No, it was on purpose. I'm trying to keep the sides separate here, but obviously now we're in the full in-depth mode as one that has been there. But women's side, overall review, we'll get into the schedule as well as key results, and we'll get into breakout candidates at the end of the show as well. I mean, it was a very good season. Obviously, you look at a lot of the individual performances. There's a lot of standouts, especially in track and field. And for those especially kind of listening to this, you're probably wondering, is track and cross country going to be included? This is going to be track specifically. Cross country we will get to later on in the fall. Key going into fall, so the structure is going to make sense, but it's going to be just track and field before we get too far, indoor and outdoor. But you looked at overall a lot of the performances. I mean, you had GLIAC scorers, and we'll get into some notable ones. You had a lot of great team performances overall. The depth on this team has certainly been there. It's just pushing the whole range up. That's really the only thing that this team is missing as far as everybody individually. But you're still seeing great performances, throws, sprints, jumps. And for this program especially, I know that Joe and I talked about this, especially when we interviewed Coach Jackson. We interviewed Ignatius Jackson, Daisy England, Hannah Brock, Whitney Farrell, Noah Griffith at the beginning of the year. This team is still rebuilding, and it is very much still a young group. And that's something that you look at. There's a lot of veteran presence, like myself and a lot of the 9 other seniors that will be gone for this next year. But it's a very young group still. And especially with the core, especially adding Coach Jackson in the sprints and hurdles and jumps department, there's still going to be a lot of work to be done. But I mean, really, they set a pretty good standard this year to just continue to move up with this program years over years. And that's a delighted thing to see here in Ferris State.
Yeah, that's the coolest part about it, especially when you look at the results and stuff all the way down. You're not really seeing a whole lot of junior and seniors in the year column. You're seeing a lot of freshmen and sophomore and stuff get up there. So I think especially when you think about the performances next year, especially when you go into fall season and then coming back next year, in that 2025 spot for the outdoor season, it's going to be sick to see how well everybody's improving over the off season. And I think especially, like you said, Brandon, with it being such a young core and a new coaching staff and just getting a little bit more people kind of get into that veteran roles, it's going to make a very promising aspect for how this team's going to do.
I feel like we talk about it with every team we've talked about, at least to this point, but the mix that the Bulldogs seem to have of young players, not only just being on the team, but also contributing in such a big way. And we've said that for golf. We've said it now for track as well. And it's so true. And I think it really establishes the culture that the Bulldogs have and what Coach Couch is trying to do. And as you mentioned, Brandon, Coach Jackson coming in, really trying to establish that culture from the moment that these athletes step on campus, and the freshmen contributing throughout the season really goes to show that it's working.
Yeah, for sure. And with the 4 coaching staff that are now here, obviously Brody mentioned Coach Kelch, Coach Jackson, Coach Melissa Kessler assisting with distance, as well as Coach Larry Levine, who's done a great job with the throws program. You can definitely see that they're starting to take shape, and there's starting to be a lot more emphasis thrown into the program. So it's really just going to be being able to get out some good recruiting classes, being able to develop them, and being able to throw down some really good results. But we'll kind of look back at outdoor, and then we'll kind of touch on indoor as well, even though it was a little bit of a go. But overall, some pretty good performances this year. A couple just to highlight. Hannah Brock, 1740 in the 5K, as well as doing really well in the 10K at the GLIACs as well. Nia Tyron, the leader in the 100 and the 400-meter hurdles. Whitney Farrell is a name that especially has been thrown around campus for what was an amazing performance this year. 10:53 in the steeple. That's an NCAA Division II Provisional Nationals qualifier. She missed out on a couple spots with nationals because the Provo marks are insane, and the sport is becoming more insane, and there's more people running insane times. So it's just a tough battle to go through. But quite a few, obviously, really good performances across the board. And a lot of these key contributors are going to be coming back as well. Whitney Farrell only being a sophomore. Rebecca Marvin, the leader in the throws category. She's a junior. She'll be back for one more year based off of my knowledge from who's coming back. Obviously, we still are guessing at the end of the day because we don't know for sure. But there's still a lot of good promise. And you look especially a lot at the sprints and jumps departments. A lot of freshmen, a lot of first-year collegiate athletes. So there's a lot of room to grow there with Lacey Zimmerman, Anna Fortier, and a lot of those sprinters as well that are getting in. But on the women's side, I think there's especially a really good emphasis on the distance department. There's a lot of depth that's spilled over from good cross-country seasons, which is great. And now you're starting to see a lot of the young talent around when it comes to sprints, when it comes to hurdles, and when it comes to jumps. Now you're being able to really encapsulate that all into one big team performance. And that's something that you especially want when you're looking at outdoor and indoor championships scoring as a team, which at the end of the day, those are the things you're looking for as a program that you want to do to be successful.
Yeah, and especially with that being so young, in the next year, 2 years maybe, you're going to see them become pretty solid veteran aspects on the team, where you're going to have that to where they can now teach the younger runners now and the younger athletes that are going to be coming in to just keep that rolling. And that's going to make sure that, I mean, for years to come, you're going to have some very solid. The best thing about having a team that is older and especially can have that type of veteran leadership is that it's going to keep on going, because you're going to have that type of work ethic, that type of learning and knowledge instilled not only from the coaches, but it's more valuable when it comes to the actual athletes on the team, because that just can build up the team culture even more.
And Brandon, you mentioned that a lot of the young players are running sprints, doing the jumps, doing the throws, things like that, and the hurdles. Well, that plays right into Coach Jackson's strengths, working with the young people, being energetic in what he does. And I think that relationship that he's able to build with those young athletes coming in right away to the program and over the next couple of years as they continue to grow and improve in their craft, that just works so well with what Coach Jackson is able to do and how he tries to encourage these young athletes and get them to grow into their sport.
Yeah, absolutely. There's certainly a lot of upbeat buzz with this program, and it's very exciting as one that now has to call himself an alum. I can't really say it as of yet. It's been a month, but it's still not there yet. But team results as well from GLIACs and outdoor this past year. The women finished 7th out of 10 teams with 68 points, which is very impressive. I believe it was just 1 point off of, 22.5 points. I read that wrong. I read Davenport, who was number 6. But certainly competing against those bottom teams, now it's just moving up the ladder. That's what this team really is looking forward to, and trying to just get that depth pushed back up and starting to score more points incrementally to get up to the Davenports, get up to the Northern Michigans, the Wayne States that are really premier programs outside of, the two obvious ones in Saginaw and Grand Valley. But I think that's certainly something that is possible for this group. And you have to take in mind too, year after year, it's really incredible to see a lot of these teams consistently putting together these numbers, because especially in a sport like track and field, a lot of people probably talk about this when it comes to being healthy at the moment of time, because you're worried about 3 seasons, not just one. And there's not really the same consideration with other sports. Obviously, some that we've talked about already, tennis and golf, have a fall kind of preview season before the spring gets going. And then obviously you have fall ball for football, you have fall soccer in season, then you have spring as well. So there's a couple seasons, but really it's 3 incremental, successful championship seasons you're shooting for all in a calendar year. So health is a major priority, and especially in the sport of running, which is very redundant. There's a lot of times where injuries become very much an issue. And for a lot of these teams, because we had a couple this year on the women's side, the men's side as well, me included, that knocked out a couple of weeks to even a month of time. It's certainly impressive to see a lot of those teams. So that's something that they're certainly shooting for, to be able to keep a lot of that roster healthy, which they did a pretty good job of this year. There was obviously some obstacles to go through, but that's really the key each and every year when you're looking at a lot of these teams, especially that are at the top, that we are shooting for. It's consistency performance-wise, the depth, being able to go from one person to another if that happens, and being very versatile as well as different events to be able to go to the GLIAC championships, read the field, and have a successful performance.
Yeah, and that's the tough part about running, is that it's not like a high contact sport, but when you get an injury kind of, to your back, or even like, when we talked like Ignatius and stuff, he had that hamstring issue where it's tough to kind of get back to 100%, because when you do, or when you think you are, you might want to wait even longer, because you can re-aggravate it in those type of events where, it can just kind of have like that snowball effect where it just gets worse and worse. And that's the tough part about running, because you struggle with that too, Brandon. And it's just not easy to recover when you get those lower body injuries in a sport like running, where you have those re-aggravations and you always have to use those things. Because every day, you're walking, you're kind of moving and stuff like that. And you just got to really make sure that you take as much time off as possible. But then that's the worst thing, is because you then have to, when you get back to 100%, you already lost all that improvement from the season, and you're trying to get back to it, and then you might be pushing yourself too hard. It's just a tough thing where it could just be a slippery slope when it comes to recovery.
I think it's so impressive to look at what these athletes are able to do, not just in the track season, but also throughout the entire year, right? Because for every other sport, of course, the athletes are practicing year round, they're in the weight room, they're doing whatever. But these track athletes are not all of them run cross country, granted, but the ones that do are competing year round. And I think that's such a marked difference, that kind of what you were alluding to, Brandon, in terms of the ability that you have to have with your mindset and your body staying healthy. And it's a very, very long and taxing season of competition, where year round, you're not only just training, but you're also competing against other athletes for results. And that makes it so much tougher than a lot of other areas in different sports, and what they're able to do for their extenuated season. So I think it's just incredibly impressive, the mindset that these athletes have and the ability that they have to train year round while also competing.
100%. And to comment on Joe's, it's not a physical sport, I'd beg to differ, and we also signed concussion forms, so that proves that right off the bat.
I'm just saying, it's not like a football thing where you're getting bashed around and stuff.
Yeah,
it is a hard sport to do, especially when you're in sprints, and especially when you're doing like long jump and stuff like that, hurdles. You have a lot of contact, and it's aggravating to your lower body. I'm not knocking track or anything here. I love track. I love the track. Don't get me wrong, but I'm just saying it's not as physical as football, but still, you get injuries that are honestly harder to recover from when you have sports like that, when you're running and stuff.
Yeah, very true. I'm not trying to attack you or anything. I was just saying.
The tone said otherwise.
Oh, okay. Anyway.
I'm just joking.
We'll keep going here.
All love.
We'll talk to indoor a little bit too, because that was really where this team showed a lot of individual success and performances. Obviously, you saw Claudia Wilkinson, indoor GLIAC champion and high jump, incredible performance from her. And she's especially one that we talked to a year ago, Joe, really has battled through a lot of injuries and has still been extremely successful. Danae Feldspach as well had a breakout, outstanding mile, ended up finishing third on the podium, which was very, very impressive on that performance, especially with how loaded that field was. But those two, especially getting on the podium, was great for this group, finishing seventh among the GLIAC teams. Certainly we'll love to see improvement. And I know the team especially thinks this, talking to a lot of them. We want to see us go higher. Obviously, we're taking a step forward. It's a little one, but we want to make big steps. So that's obviously something to look forward to. Looking into next year, some individual performances from indoor, some standout ones that were truly impressive, and not trying to be biased or anything, that at least I saw. Certainly saw some great performances. Abby Winkle, who's a sophomore, 57 in the 400. She's certainly improving. When she's healthy, she can be a really dangerous runner in the 400. You saw especially Claudia Wilkinson, Rebecca Marvin leading the group as well. Nia Tyron, especially in the 400. She was working on the 60 hurdles a little bit this year. We're certainly going to be interesting to see what she does with that next year if she kind of goes back to that. Danae Feldspach has mentioned the 800 and the mile, as well as the younger group as well in the sprints and jumps. So you've seen a lot of the same names, and a lot of them are coming back. So that's a really good thing for them. But you saw it in indoor individual-wise. really able to dial it in with a lot of individual performances that were good. And I think with this group, especially when you look at the scores, I mean, there's going to be quite a few back. There's going to be a couple that we're going to be missing that were really key contributors, Danae being one of them on the women's side. But I think there's just a lot of really good chemistry with this group as far as the team within itself. And I think that's something that the program's really trying to improve. And I think that's something that can really help them moving forward. If everybody's on the same page moving forward, that's obviously going to be the key number one, because it's really hard in track, and I can't stress this enough. Everybody's competing basically at the same time away from one another. It's not one simple, one playing surface. Everybody is pretty much in one space. You have the ability to go back and forth, but when you're out on the track, they're throwing at one end, they're doing jumps at the other end, and then there's people running around in circles around everybody the entire time. So it's really hard to be able to see that, but you're definitely starting to see a little bit, and that's obviously what the coach is trying to get together and really kind of, I wouldn't want to say like fix the culture, but trying to improve it. Being able to have that team contribution is certainly important within the culture-wise, because that's almost just as important as the success on the numbers that you see at the end of the day as well.
Yeah, and talking with a lot of the track athletes and stuff, they say when they go to a track meet, to me, it's one of the most overstimulating things ever with how much stuff is going on. But to be able to just kind of feed off the energy and stuff and especially with all those events going on, talking to them, they say that's just what makes it so much better to compete, is because you have all these people trying to better themselves. But just making sure that the team can go in there together and just make sure that they have one simple goal is like the most important thing. But like I said, track meets, very overstimulating. There's so much stuff going on there. It's insane. Like how, you can't focus on one thing. And that's kind of the tough part too, when you're thinking about, making sure that the team culture is there. It's just like, you kind of get lost in where everybody's at. You want to make sure that you're focusing on yourself, making sure you're getting ready for the race, but you also want to make sure you're there for your teammates who maybe need some support and stuff like that, which is also a tough thing, because when you have so much going on, it's easy to kind of get lost in it, especially when track is kind of like an individual sport, but it's team sport at the same time. So it's tough to deal with.
I got to shoot a lot of highlights for the GLIAC Outdoor Championships, and you're absolutely right, Joe. I was like shooting something, and I saw something else way in the background. I was like, oh, I got to run quick over there. So I'm like bouncing back and forth between everything, and I don't know how the athletes are able to keep up, but it was impressive. Anyways, one thing I want to speak about is Brandon, you kind of talked about the individual ceilings that we saw from this women's squad, the individual performances, a lot of the records that they had, individual records. That ceiling is there, but the team ceiling is what really needs to rise. And that's what the Bulldogs are going to have to try to figure out. But I think that, as we kind of talked about earlier, with such a young core and some of those veteran runners and even the younger athletes as well that have set really good benchmarks, working with these coaches, improving the culture and moving forward, improving themselves as athletes, that will elevate that ceiling. And then you're talking about competing with those teams like Davenport and Wayne State that you were mentioning, Brandon.
Yeah, absolutely. And with the schedule, I think this certainly, there's a lot of really good meets out there that really do help us moving into a lot of these championship caliber meets. You're talking a lot of the invite meets themselves. So whether it's Bucknell and outdoors, big meet and indoors, we're putting ourselves in some good positions here. And with the flow of the schedule, you kind of start off with a lot slower meets, and then you get back up to the faster, more elite meets at the end of the year, which is a very good flow. And I think that's something that really helps this group. It's definitely, I'll be very curious to see, because over the years past, you obviously have split squad meets a lot of the time. I'll be very curious moving forward if we're going to start seeing these groups in more split squads where there's more meets on the schedule. Half and half are going to one place, half and half are going to the other, just based on what that high quality is that they're seeking. Because a lot of the times it is really hard to find a meet that is not a huge, very expensive, expense-wise meet to go to where everything is an invite and an elite. You see a lot of distance fest, you see a lot of sprint fest, and a lot of the times you will see one is loaded on one side, but the other might not be loaded at all. That was a case of Western Kentucky this past year. The distance group didn't go because there was nobody that really we could compete with on the men's side or women's side in distance. Sprints-wise, everything was there, but not for the distance side. And then Bucknell, it's the exact opposite. So there's a lot of the times where we're going to see an opportunity for split squad. So it'll be very interesting to see what that coaching staff puts together for a schedule. Now, as one that has went through the schedule for 5 years, to see maybe it might change a little bit. We might see some more split squad type of stuff, because it'll be very interesting to track and follow. Now is one that'll be working around the team a little bit, but it'll be very interesting to see how that potentially could be an option, looking to push that ceiling up that you mentioned, Brody.
How, on a personal for you, Brandon, how do you kind of figure that? How much does that kind of improve I don't want to say improve, but just like how does that affect kind of going into the meet when it's a split squad? Like, have you kind of had anything that you can say on that or what?
I mean, it's a different type of feel, not just getting on a bus or a van and not everybody's there. But I think when it comes down to it, you're always looking at where you are at in that race or that meet, and that kind of really trumps exactly who's next to you. Now, it's great to have the whole team with you, but you have to look at it because it's a team sport, but it's also an individual sport, right? Because everybody needs to be at top tier level 10 by the time you're in GLIACs, right? When you hit that full 2-week taper and you're ready to rip, you got to be at the max caliber that you possibly can. That's your whole goal the entirety of the year. So it definitely, when it comes down to it, mentality-wise, it's a little different. But really, when you get through the trip, that's kind of where you notice it the most, is like when you get off to go stretch or go run or whatever it might be. It's a smaller group. But when you get to the meet and you get within that 2 hour to hour time where before you're competing, where you're dialed in, it's really the same routine. And that's kind of something that I've certainly learned, because a lot of those bigger meets you almost treat more, because you're like, all right, I got to be a little bit more attentive on this compared to the lower meets. But really kind of figuring out what works for you and applying that no matter who's on the line next to you, time-wise, or whatever size of the race it might be. As long as you can dial it in, you can be able to amp yourself up for those big meets, but not to the point where you are drastically changing your routine that works for you all year. It's something that definitely is, I would say, my insight on what I've found that has worked, but might not work for everybody else, because I know some people individually that really do a great job of turning up level 10 momentum-wise going into the bigger meets, and sometimes it's a little bit harder to push up into the smaller meets because it's a very momentum-based race. But I think that's certainly something that a lot of individuals take in mind when it comes to those kind of meets.
Mm-hmm. So, Brandon, you mentioned that by the time you get to GLIAC, I think you said you're ready to rip and you want to go, but what does the schedule, sorry to kind of turn this into an interview of Brandon Worth, but what does the schedule do throughout the season to get you to that point, and what could maybe be improved in the schedule to help you get even further along?
I think the number one thing that when I ran the schedule this last year, when we went to Lee, we went to Hill, where we're going to go to Hilltopper for Bowling Green, and then you go to Pennsylvania. Obviously, right out of the gate, that's a lot of travel, which is a beneficial thing. But when it comes down to the end of the year, a lot of it is very close. So as far as you kind of get through a travel schedule, it's really a road stand if you consider it in soccer or football terms or basketball terms. It really takes a little bit out of your body early on, and then you kind of sink back in at the end of the year. For some people, it works. It really is the way of like, this is the end of the way that I like it. It's really kind of okay be going from this travel heavy schedule to really settling down, where some people like to break it up a little bit. They like to be, close for a couple weeks, then gone, then close, building that pattern. And it's really finding the pattern that works the most. And when it works with split squads, a lot of the times there will be people that go to local meets that are a lot smaller and more fitting for the competition, while some of the other travelers go out to the bigger meets that are farther away. So I think when it comes to the schedule, I think that really kind of the way it is right now, it's not a bad spot. And I'm obviously not going to totally critique on what the coaching staff is doing or anything. I would be very curious to see if they start more local and then push the travel schedule a little bit back to places like Pennsylvania, and then maybe a travel meet before or after then, and see if they go maybe more local first to kind of do like a little mountainous curve going from really close, very far, really close. I'll be curious if that would maybe be a change, because I know there's quite a few really, really elite meets that are in the middle of the year that the coaches want to go to. It's just being able to get the athletes to that point so that they can race competitively at those meets. That's the number one key factor.
I'd have to imagine too, and just one last thought on the schedule. I'd have to imagine that weather plays a huge factor, right? Because even some of these early meets, Tennessee, Kentucky, in mid to late March, I mean, it's probably nicer down there than it is up here in Michigan, but I would still have to imagine that weather is a big thing, and just running outside, it's a huge difference when it's super windy, right, Brandon? I'd have to imagine that plays a pretty big role into the scheduling as well.
It 100% does. And that's the reason why you see a lot of the teams going down to Kentucky, Tennessee, Carolinas. There's a lot of other D1, D2 teams that go down there, especially to Raleigh and NC State at the beginning of the year. It's because it's nicer and the fields are more equipped and ready to roll for that year-round running, which is definitely something you have to take into consideration. A lot of those teams down there are running year-round in the South, where they're going outside in February, and it's an unfortunate thing that we can't because we get snow in April, but it's just something you got to deal with a little bit. So
classic Michigan.
Yep. Yeah. It's basically, but the schedule is very much based around the weather. And sometimes we went to Kentucky and we've had colder temperatures and snow and rain compared to what it's been in Michigan. It's a risk that you have to take. And obviously sometimes it works out, but Mother Nature, very unpredictable. So sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah.
Mother Nature, classic.
Mother Nature. So anyway, we'll wrap it up here as we are running low on time. We'll get into some breakout candidates here for next year on the women's track side. This will, of course, be indoor or outdoor. I have to go with my fellow steeple people person. Whitney Farrell is going to have a fantastic year next year. It has been amazing to watch. I mean, her first race smashed the school record. Incredible stuff. I mean, it is just absolutely phenomenal, the work that she's done. And she's constantly looking at ways to improve. That mentality and attack mindset that she goes into a race is really something that I enjoy watching as a spectator. It is really fun to see her race, and especially in the event that I know firsthand how much some days it sucks to be able to grind out some of those really tough, really contested races is super impressive. And she's showing a lot of those signs of consistency-wise that I love looking at metrics to say, yep, that is a breakout candidate. So I'm going to pick Whitney Farrell as my breakout candidate. Call me biased. I don't care. She's going to be the breakout, and I know it.
Hey, cool, man. I got to go with Lacey Zimmerman. I think she's going to have some really great improvement upcoming, especially if she works hard in this offseason. But if you look at her numbers, especially going through, when you look at the GAVSU extra weekend meet, I mean, she did well on the Golden Grizzly invite in the 100 meter. And then especially when she was in the 200 meter, a lot of those meets that she was racing against was a good amount of upperclassmen. Some seniors tossed in there, a lot of juniors, some sophomores. But as a freshman, she's able to hold her own. And especially with some of those bigger meets, I think it was the Lee University invite where there's a lot more runners in those situations. She did finish, I think, around like 22nd or 23rd in there. But still, if you look at it, there was a lot of upperclassmen in front of her, and she was only separated by maybe 1 or 2 seconds. And obviously with sprints, 1 or 2 seconds is a big amount. But if you can just work hard in the offseason, I think she's going to have a pretty big breakout year. And only being a sophomore this upcoming athletic season, I think that just shows how much more room for improvement she has. And she might be a breakout performer next year, the year after that, and senior year too. So sky's the limit.
All right, Brody.
And I'm going to go with Abby Winkle. I think she showed a lot of promise, specifically in the 400. She ran a very good time. Top mark this season was just right at 57 seconds. That's a very impressive mark. And Brandon, you kind of alluded to her earlier. When she's healthy, she's such a dominant competitor. So I'd like to see her, obviously stay healthy as with all of our athletes. But if she can stay healthy and put together a consistent season, I think she could really push for potentially some very elite levels, not only in the Bulldogs room this year, but maybe historically as well.
Wow, there you go. Those are our breakout candidates. Hope you enjoyed this women's track and field episode. We're going to tackle the men's next week. So if you don't want to miss out on an episode, be sure to subscribe, WBRN.com, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. You're listening with us live over the airwaves. Get that preset dialed, and you'll be ready same time, same place next week. Thanks to Dezos Digital for making this show possible. Fellas, another good one, and I guess we'll see you in a week.
Sounds good.
All right, so until next time.
Take care, everybody.